Someday you'll find out who your friend is.
What a grip. That's from counting money.
What an imagination. That's from writing movies.
With just a handful of films, starting with Reservoir Dogs, writer, director, and actor Quentin Tarantino has made quite a splash and made movies the way he's wanted to. You may call them mashup, you may call them a cultural compendium. I call them films that reflect his sensibility. And he's here on Under the Influence. Quentin, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
You've got to tell me the first movie you saw that really scared you. I've always wanted to ask you this.
That was the first time I was actually really like almost terrified and sickened by a movie was I was in the 5th grade. The double feature was Don't Go in the Basement and Last House on the Left. So Don't Go in the Basement, that's pretty easy. All right, so then Last House on the Left starts. And it was so scary and so violent. And so that was exactly my fear. I wasn't afraid of monsters. I was afraid of home invaders. When I was a little boy, I was afraid of home invaders. To me, that was the worst thing, is people coming in and commandeering your family or commandeering you. It was just so terrifying. Krug and company, David Hess and Fred Lincoln and all those guys.
The kind of movies you're talking about, when we talk about these exploitation films, were films that, for a great extent, weren't taken seriously. Mm-hmm. And so you could actually bring your own set of feelings to them and help you build a sensibility, because there wasn't a real critical mass, pardon the expression, of critics talking about what these movies were. You could go out and find things with them, couldn't you?
Well, yeah, one of the things, people oftentimes will ask me why it is that I respond to, for lack of a better, we can call it exploitation cinema, B cinema, genre cinema, whatever. Why I respond to it so much. One, I've always really, of course I'm going to respond as a cinema lover to stuff that's viscera.
It's very primal.
It's primal, and there's something going on, and it may be subversive, it may be this, but there's something going on there. But the number one reason I like those movies, what I do with them is different. All right. I'm taking them and I'm turning them into something else. Hopefully you get the same viscera. Hopefully you get the same charge and the electricity of it. But one of the biggest thrills to me cinematically watching those movies is, it's easy for a normal audience to just see a B movie from any kind of era right now. All right, straight to video movie. Just like, no, that's not very good, and those actors, whatever. There's many cheesy elements in it. They haven't had much time. And it's easy for people to put themselves above a movie. But when they don't put themselves above a movie and they keep watching it, it's just keeping you interested enough to keep watching. When all of a sudden you actually click into the movie. When all of a sudden care about the movie. You actually care about what happens. You want to know what happens. And these characters actually mean something to you. When, in this crazy, weird, sleazy little exploitation movie, when did you start caring? And the fact that now you care and now you're invested, that's one of my favorite things that can happen in cinema. And especially when people get connected to a movie that they would, by all rights think that they're superior to. With me going to see them, I actually literally was in the later part of elementary school going on to junior high. And there weren't other kids doing that a whole lot. All right, going to see those movies. They were seeing the bigger movies. So I'm literally I have no one to share it with. And I didn't have any friends other than the other people in the theater. Yeah, so it's always, it's just it was just all compounded in me. And there was, if I ever met anybody, even, at some weird film festival, weird screening, another film geek, I didn't know any film geeks when I was a kid. I was it. So whenever I'd meet some film geek at some event, I couldn't believe. I hung on to that person. We talked for 3 hours. They knew all the actors I know.
But what this is all sort of evoking for me is this: that you find something you like in every genre. But what you like so much about it is that fearlessness, that boldness. But I want to actually ask you about classic movies. I mean, I want to talk to you about Cirque, because we never actually had this discussion before. And one of the things that really, I think, attracts you is just guys who are unafraid, filmmakers who are unafraid to just sort of say, this is what this movie is. I mean, it's completely unapologetic about everything that it is.
I love any director that's going to like take a genre or take a subgenre and then embrace it to its core, you know. So, you know, if you don't like full-blown melodrama, then you have no business watching a Douglas Sirk movie, and that's what. And in a weird way, the more preposterous the movie, the better he handles it. The more he can, you know, he just, you know, well, also, there's the themes of Douglas Sirk, but then there's also is the fact that, you know, he really is, you know, one of the true, like forerunners of, say, Scorsese, as far as like his fluid camera movements, and then really cinematically trying to figure out, you know, the camera was important to Douglas Sirk, and him cinematically doing set piece, you know, he's doing cinematic set pieces, you know, in something like, you know, the dance sequence in the Dorothy Malone wild dance sequence in Written on the Wind, or that you know, to me one of the greatest pan shots of all time, the reveal of Rock Hudson on the beach in Magnificent Obsession, where you're just following Jane Wyman, you realize that Rock Hudson's been there all along. Those are all really, really terrific cinematic moves, and he'd even do Coppola kind of aspects of, like, you know, walls turning into scrims and going away. But what I, you know, love about his tackling of themes is just the complete embracing of this soap opera melodramatic material. One of my favorite movies to actually show modern audiences, and when it comes to the old classic films, is Magnificent Obsession. Because, you know, I've showed it to, you know, some young actors that, you know, want to kind of scoff at 50s melodramas, and particularly when they, you know,
because they're so big.
Yeah, they're so big, or just, there is a slight bit of, you know, Barbara Rush, Rock Hudson kind of acting that, like, you know, is obviously not post-Brando, all right, you know, for a second, and they have to get over that. But then they do quite well, and Rock Hudson is actually quite magnificent in that movie. But the thing that's so much fun is, especially, and I've watched it with women and men, is they really get into that story. Because, you know, they don't see melodramas where people, you know, they see TV movies, they see Lifetime movies, they think that's melodrama. They don't know the true fun of ever-escalating emotions building up to a volcanic pitch. And they're actually hanging on every wild, crazy, improbable, you know, twist and turn in the storyline that was far-fetched in the 50s, but Sirk's believing it and he's selling it to you, and I love that. I just love I love that storytelling, but I also love watching people get really roped up into that movie.
But it's that unapologetic aspect of it.
Oh,
it's that huge scale, something this big that's not flinching from it, that's saying, this is what I promise, and this is what I'm going to deliver.
I think the only person that's really around that can get away with that, and I mean, you know, do it big and get away with it, is Pedro Almodovar. Is the only one that can really do Sirk-style size emotions and pieces.
But you know who Almodovar loves? He loves Manelli. He loves what Manelli does, which is that same kind of thing, that almost a musical, poetic kind of camera.
Oh, you're using you're using the other guy, I would say, that is, you know, pre-Scorsese, as far as, you know, and on every few movies you could throw Raoul Walsh in there, but not every one of them.
Right.
All right. But those are guys that were trying to figure out their films visually and through the camera, and cinema was a part of the process. And you know and what's not seen in the frame is as important as what's seen.
Or that use of color in that way, that certainly Almodovar and Scorsese and Manelli all do.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why it's like for instance, you know, I've thought about doing from time to time a melodrama, but you know what? I can honestly say I don't think I'd want to do one in America for Americans in English language. I think you can get away with it in another country's language. I think Spain is perfect for the high emotions of that, and the fact that it would be broken down with subtitles and in Spanish goes a long way to buying it. But I can hear the bad laughs in the movie theaters if you actually were to do melodrama the way Douglas Sirk did, and like you hear them from time to time when you see them at.
People are laughing out of embarrassment, though, as much as anything else. They're being moved in a way that, and it makes them uncomfortable. It's that the laughter is almost as much them kind of laughing at their vulnerability as the movie itself.
It is unsophisticated. It wasn't sophisticated in the 50s.
I would agree. It is. There's sophistication.
But we've sophisticated. I think we've out-sophisticated ourselves out of some of the pleasures of movies.
I see. I think what you're talking about is we use irony now in the way they used to use melodrama.
Yeah.
And there are ways to get around that. What we're talking about in Western culture, Europe, is talking about opera, which always is a foundation for absurd, heightened melodrama in opera. And if you know that sensibility, then it easily comes to the screen because that's what Europeans have that we don't. But the way people get around that, I think, and I think of some of your stuff as being melodramatic in scale, is the way that Sergio Leone used opera in the Western. I mean, that moment I'm talking about.
I do operatic stuff, but I don't go for for that melodrama stuff the way I would if I could just do it. But but at the same time, in Spain they haven't sophisticated themselves out of those pleasures. In Hong Kong they don't. But that's a big point, though. All right, Hong Kong will play melodrama just as big as Cirque ever did. Yet we've all watched those movies in theaters with Americans and seeing them laughing. It's like it's too big.
See, I guess
we've heard those bad laughs.
Yeah, but I think a lot of those
we want to kill those people.
Yeah, but a lot of times, exactly, those people are kind of laughing because they're laughing at the sides of it. But they're laughing because wow, somebody's actually doing this, and you can hear the embarrassment in those laughs sometimes.
But I have to bring up something else. You started talking about Minnelli. Well, one of the musicals that's hands down my favorite. I've seen it in the theaters many times because as much as I like musicals, it's not my favorite genre of the old classic Hollywood films. But I love Meet Me in St. Louis. I even had an old girlfriend who would hey, they're showing Meet Me in St. Louis at the Monica 4. Let's go see it.
What do you like about Meet Me in St. Louis?
And I can honestly say, as much as I like Judy Garland, and it's Vincent Minnelli's whole pleasing package. This kind of version of America that I don't know if I ever bought, but it's very pleasant in this telling of it. The songs are terrific. It just could not look better, and it's just damn entertaining. That back in the days of Laserdisc, I got into a little Judy Garland kick and got the Hardy Girls and I could go on singing and kind of just started diving into the Pirate and started diving into our movies.
The Pirate, oh my God! But what about A Star Is Born? You must like that.
I'm gonna out myself. That's one of the movies I've never seen.
You've never seen?
I missed it in its big revival thing.
20 years ago.
Yeah, 20 years ago. And so I've always held off on it because I knew I should see it in the big screen and not the kind of pan and scan version. But it was actually interesting. I found myself not when I got into my 2-second Judy Garland kick, I found myself not going for stuff like Star Is Born. The Pirate I'd actually already seen. I did gravitate more towards Me and My Gal and the Hardy Girls. Younger and the more kind of fun.
That's sort of that spirit of exuberance in those movies.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Because there's a kind of innocence in the way she's so eager to please and ingratiates herself in those films. Is that what you were responding
to? Oh, yeah, well, it's like, it's just, Hardy Girls, I remember from watching that on Movie Greats when I was a kid. I don't remember sitting down and watching it all the way, but I remember seeing bits of it and knowing about it and everything. If you get turned on to Judy Garland because of Meet Me in St. Louis, that's a perfect movie as a follow-up. That's a perfect double feature there.
Sure.
Because it's the same kind of
film.
And it's kind of an interesting story, the whole idea of starting a restaurant chain in the Old West and the whys and the wherefores of how you start a franchise in the Old West. What other movies about that?
For you, who were some of the American actors who've been influential on you, who you just sort of carry around in your head a lot, like snapshots?
Gosh, well, it's funny because there's I have such a big knowledge of the different actors from that time period.
I've heard this about you.
Yeah, that it's like they're really kind of all over the board. All right, on one regards, I'm a big fan of John Wayne. In other regards, I'm a big fan of Cary Grant and these kind of people. But also other stars that were minor stars. Also, or some of my favorites. Like people like Aldo Ray and Ralph Meeker. I think they're like the quintessential 50s leading men, and I love those guys. And there's all kinds of actors like that I love following their careers.
But you talk about Aldo. This is a guy who went from doing sort of B action stuff to doing movies with Judy Holliday.
Yeah, well, he actually started doing the movie with Judy Holliday.
Yeah.
He started off at the top with George Cukor. But, you know...
Were you a fan of that movie, by the way?
Oh, I love his performance in that. And I like that movie a lot, too. I always thought that movie was ridiculously underrated. It's also really, to me, you know, the sad part of these stories. It's like, it's a lot of fun to actually watch because, you know, sorry, I don't mean to be flying all over the place. But
no.
Like, somebody like Aldo Ray and Ralph Meeker, yeah, you'll see Kiss Me Deadly. They'll show those, you know, in television a lot. Or they'll show Passive Glory. They'll show stuff like that, maybe We're No Angels. But you don't realize that actually Aldo Ray and Ralph Meeker actually starred in quite a few different films in the 50s. And because they're not so well known now, that those films never made it into the syndication packages.
Who were your favorites then? The women, that's what I want to know.
Women,
were you a Jean Arthur person?
Yeah, I like Jean Arthur. I don't I like her. I loved her when I discovered her. I discovered Capra movies like around like 16 or 17, and then I, you know, thought she was fantastic. I like Off the Beaten. I like seeing like Iona Massey in Invisible Agent.
Oh God.
And I love Invisible Agent. I've always loved it. I actually, I remember watching Raiders of the Lost Ark when it first came out. Like, hey, this structure is actually quite similar to Invisible Agent, and it is.
What is it? but what else is? What isn't it similar to? Is the question. Right. Like steals from like 300 other movies, including like 30 you probably never even heard of before.
But I was also, you know, a Barbara Stanwyck fan. She's terrific. I like Veronica Lake. I'm a big fan of hers.
What's Barbara Stanwyck for you?
Let me think about that.
Night Nurse?
No. I like Night Nurse. I guess like my favorite like Barbara Stanwyck-esque performance would probably be The Lady Eve, even though that's not my favorite Sturgis film. But
what is your favorite Sturgis film?
I think it can't help but be. Well, it actually okay. I guess it's Unfaithfully Yours, even though I almost said Hail the Conquering Hero. But, you know, in a weird way, the only reason I stop is Unfaithfully Yours actually is just one of my favorite comedies of all time, whether it's Sturgis or not.
What do you like about Unfaithfully Yours?
Well, one, I consider Rex Harrison gives one of the three greatest comic performances in the history of cinema in that movie. To me, the three best performances in comic performances in cinema is Cary Grant in His Girl Friday, Eli Wallach in The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, and Rex Harrison in Unfaithfully Yours. I could listen to the dialogue in Unfaithfully Yours, and especially the way Rex Harrison says it, just all day long. I even like the remake of it, which actually has big, gigantic chunks of Sturgis dialogue in there, surprisingly enough. And then like the way he uses the music and the whole like again fantasy sequence going on. It's just I love that movie. But it's like to me it's like His Girl Friday. It's just like it's great dialogue and hysterical pitch performance.
I'm wondering this because I wonder if this influences the way you talk to actors, just the way these actresses and actors worked in that era in some of those classic films.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, it's funny. I never a big fan of John Huston. However, no, I've never really liked him. But in the 80s,
like not a Maltese Falcon fan.
I like the Maltese Falcon. All right, I like the Maltese Falcon, but
Stretch your Sierra Madre, not a fan.
No, I like Hawks' use of the Bogart mythology mystique more than Huston's use. Back when I wanted to make movies, back at Video Archives,
right?
You know, I tried to watch as many making of movies as I possibly could. And to me, the only directors I actually saw working with actors like the way I thought is the way you should work with them would be the way Huston was talking to the actors in that, and the way when you saw Spielberg, like talk to the actors in any of the Making a Raiders of the Lost Ark movies.
I can't do this, though, since you alluded to Bogart, without asking you a little bit more about Bogart. I mean, not just in the Huston movies, but Bogart in general. What you felt about it?
Oh, I'm a huge fan of Bogart. And one thing I've always found really interesting, one of the best pieces I ever read about Bogart was Bogdanovich's book, Pieces of Time. And it's very easy for actors to get really kind of caught up with themselves or, wanting to play different types of roles and stuff. And Bogart in particular was an actor that, he had his iconic roles, and then he also liked to do stuff like Caine Mutiny and really stretch himself, African Queen, some stuff like that. It was interesting in the Bogdanovich piece, though. Bogdanovich was making a point about the fact that, there's actually nothing wrong with your signature character. and how that can be taken for granted when it shouldn't be. And his point being is, Bogart, probably more than any other male movie star, especially from the 30s and 40s, in the early 70s, had complete cachet. There was a Bogart mystique going on. College kids would go see Bogart double features, in revival houses and student screenings. And there still is a big Bogart mystique. Unfortunately, not quite as big as it was in the 70s. But his point being is, if Bogart only played African Queen and only played in movies like The Caine Mutiny, there would be no Bogart mystique today. You need the Maltese Falcon. You need him playing Philip Marlowe. You need him playing those kind of characters to create that mystique. The fact that, even today, went from hippie culture to black culture, you can still say Bogart.
And it still has that way.
Don't Bogart me, man.
Yeah.
It's even passed even to an era where it's like people, there actually might be a lot of people out there saying they don't even know who Bogart is, but it's still an adjective.
I figured part of that stuff, that sense of history you got from those,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as much as you had a film school, that was a big part of it.
Yeah, it's like one of the things that I'll do oftentimes, if it's appropriate in a movie, is I'll just get the actors together, either separately or we get them together, and I show them His Girl Friday just to show them that, not that we have to talk that fast in this movie, but you can talk that fast. And, don't be afraid of this dialogue.
Each time out, do you show them His Girlfriend?
That's not always appropriate, all right? But like anytime in any ensemble piece, like in my Four Rooms bit, I showed Tim and Amanda His Girl Friday for Pulp Fiction, Tim Roth and Amanda Plummer.
Right.
And then I showed the girls His Girl Friday.
And you're trying to impart these rhythms to the actors.
Yes, but there also is the idea of the fact that in those comedies, reality is going on, but nothing's more important than hitting that punchline. All right, that's the reality. You got to hit the punchline.
How do the actors react when you're showing them stuff?
Well, they all love, being my erstwhile students of my little. That's actually part of the reason they like working with me. All right, is they get to, be the beneficiary of some cool, movie lessons. But the only, the person I had watched the most, because it's one of the things I'm really anal about, is I have people make references, and it just kills me when I know people don't know what they're talking about.
How do you mean?
Well, what I mean is, it's like, okay, I'll give it a big example. Okay, it's like...
Yeah, you got to.
Okay, it's like when you're watching a Woody Allen movie and Juliette Lewis and Jimmy Fallon are sitting there talking, and they're talking about Lena Riefenstahl and Triumph of Will and The White Hill of Pizu Pizu, and they're talking about Gertrude Stein's second lover, and we know they don't know what they're talking about. And the fact that, not only is Jimmy Fallon, randomly having a conversation about Lena Riefenstahl, but he's actually written a monograph that is about Lena Riefenstahl in Vanity Fair in the movie. And I know Jimmy Fallon doesn't know who Lena Riefenstahl is. Even to kind of give you an example, like in the case of something like Kill Bill, where it's like the first time I'm really kind of creating, for lack of a better word, like a comic book mythology going on.
Like the Marvel Universe.
I'm totally creating my version of that. And I remember I was watching a movie once that I thought was the director did a talented job with it. Having said that, he was trying to kind of create his own world, but I realized he didn't know it that well. He hadn't thought about everything. He hadn't painted in every picture of that universe. So I knew I wasn't in good hands. He dealt with what he needed to deal with, but I know that there was a lot of questions he didn't ask. And I knew that when you create a mythology, forget about it. Stuff that never will make it to the movie, you need to know everything. You need to, I need to know how Bill was born, how Bill got to be Bill.
You're talking about actor subtext.
Yeah, but in the case of me, like I said, if you're creating a mythology, you got to know all the rules of that. It doesn't matter what the audience knows. They got to know you know. And now you can explain to the actors this is, something as simple as, one of the rules of a Hanzo sword is once you unsheath it, it has to drink blood before it ever goes back in the sheath. Even if it just means you got to, put your thumb to it. It's thirsty. Now, Daryl Hannah doesn't do that when she's like, oh, hey, this is a pretty good sword with Michael Madsen, and dumb bitch. She's not going to say anything to her, you know. So again, she kind of goes into the fight with, you know, with the demerit against her.
Having like that bad karma. So
with that bad karma. Now, the audience doesn't need to know that, but it was important that the actors know that, and it's important that I know that. That there's, you know, there's more there. So I make it a point, even when it comes to slang. I go, look, is there anything you don't know what you're saying? I want you to know what you're saying, all right? Just, you know, whatever. It could be any kind of expression. Well, according to Hoyle, this glass should be blah, blah, blah. Well, if you don't know what I'm referring to when I say according to Hoyle, then you're just spouting a line. Well, what does that mean, according to Hoyle? Well, you know, there's a book of rules of card games, and it's called according to, and it's the book of Hoyle, and that's an expression. You know, so I have to explain, you know, I want them to know what it is. But so I have them making references all the time.
Well, according to Hoyle, we're out of time. So, thanks, Kim.
Boy,
that's what we call a segue to TV.
That was a great curtain line.
We're out.